Thank you, Yongcheng, for the introduction. So when they asked me to speak here about Gödel's incompleteness theorems, I didn't really know what to talk about. So I sort of picked and chose some stuff that I think Kurt Gödel would have liked very much. I mean, it's about the size of the continuum, the reals. So, I mean, that was something dear to Gödel, and philosophy of math and physics. So, yes, see, there we go. So, since this is math, philosophy, logic, I will be a little more harsh than usual. So let it be said that, first of all, Dach and I showed that this coding that people do in second order arithmetic is fundamentally flawed. And how does one show this? And well, we can actually make models of rather strong systems of higher order arithmetic in which the reals are countable, so in which there are injections or even bijections from R to N. So that's, we'll be talking about that a lot. That's, in a nutshell, what we have been doing, Dag Norman and I, well, a lot more, but it's an important aspect. And you can, of course, reject this, and people will, as is their want. You can also embrace this idea, and that's what Dag Norman and I have done. And so you can find two new big systems in reverse math. So that's, with lots of equivalences. So there's this notion, I mean, we'll talk about that later. And of course, there are clear implications for the foundations of math and physics. And I will go into some detail because, this is, especially the physics part is, in my opinion, very interesting. So, as I said, this is joint work with Dag Norman. There's some nice papers on the archive. Eventually, they will be published, we hope. And take a look at the archive if you're interested. So let us discuss the received view. So the following can be found in many a book, has been discussed at length. And so if we order logical systems, theorems, etc., based on logical strength, then we get the Gödel hierarchy with its three ranges. So Gödel again, set theory, which won't concern us so much today, axiom of choice, large cardinals, etc. The medium range is where ordinary, that is non-set theoretic mathematics, lives. And a while ago, Hilbert and Bernays formulated this system, logical system, or systems rather, and they formalized ordinary mathematics, the Grundlagen der Mathematik. And this is the creation myth of second order arithmetic. We will get back to that if we have time. And the weak range is, well, where ordinary math lives, that is computable or nearly computable. We're talking about primitive recursion, complexity theory, P versus NP, those things. So there's three ranges, and reverse math, I hope you've all heard of that, tells us that, well, the medium range actually is mostly empty. So it paints a finer picture, which is nice. And how do we measure strength? Of course, because I mentioned logical strength. In the weak to medium range, we measure the strength based on comprehension. Which kind of sets of naturals exist, are needed to let a certain proof of a certain theorem go through. So that's, again, in a nutshell, the received view. A picture, of course, says more than 1,000 words. This is from the Gödel Centennial, Steve Simpson's contribution. So as I said, the weak range complexity theory, computable mathematics, and countable Heine-Borel compactness, these are some of these big five systems, as people call them. And if you go up a little bit, you can do sequential compactness. Even more, there's basic properties of Borel sets in ATR0, that they exist, for example. Advanced properties of Borel sets, that's pi11 comprehension, and pi12 comprehension, you can do metrization theorems for topology, as done by Simpson and Mummert. And yeah, there's not much beyond that. I mean, mathematical theorems, you can, of course, come up with examples, but they're contrived. And as I said, these are the big five. This is the base theory, RCA0, it's always assumed. And there's lots of equivalents to these four other systems. And there's even some equivalences at the level of pi 1-2 comprehension. Yeah, and there's the received view. People even claim that if you look at ordinary math, it's provable or even equivalent to most of it, one of the big five systems. And yeah, there's this huge no man's land. Nothing goes there. No mathematical theorems go there. Ordinary mathematical theorems. So there's pi 1-3, pi 1-4, pi 1-5, pi 1-7, and so on. Comprehension, and it's mostly empty. I should mention higher order reverse math for many reasons. So it's in Reverse Math 2001. It's the brainchild of Ulrich Kohlenbach. It's quite interesting. So as you know, second order arithmetic only has variables for natural numbers and sets of natural numbers. Now that's fine, but you have to code. You have to represent functions on the reals, metric spaces, and so on. This can get messy. A colleague of mine once mentioned that they tried to write down the definition of atlas in recursive analysis. So yeah, I mean, second order framework. And after 2 pages, they gave up. I mean, that's topology, obviously. Coding of functions is perhaps not that bad, but you have to code. So Ulrich Kohlenbach said, well, let's just use the language of all finite types, which, yeah, you have natural numbers, you have sets of natural numbers, sets of natural numbers, and so on. And this way, you can get rid of most of coding. There's still some coding, of course, but yeah, like for the reals, but most of it disappears because, for example, you can directly talk about discontinuous functions on the reals, which is a third order object. And well, fourth order objects, sometimes you study those too, and fifth and sixth is already out there. But so this is Ulrich Kohlenbach's higher order reverse math. It's quite interesting, especially nice equivalences. And let's take a look. Let's take a closer look so that you shall know. You must have heard of arithmetical comprehension, which is comprehension for arithmetical formulas. And here we have an arithmetical formula. There is a number that makes f 0. So yeah, of course, this is an arithmetical formula, and this kind of set exists if you have ACA 0. Now, how does one do that higher orderly? Well, it's just you have a characteristic functional, third order, and it takes as input this f and says 0 if and only if there is a 0 for f. So it's a characteristic functional if you want. Instead of saying these sets exist, we have a third order object that decides whether this is true, which is not all that crazy if you think about it. And of course, E of f is discontinuous at 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. It's also called Kleenie's E2. Yeah. So, and that gives you higher order ACA 0. Yeah, and this is a third order function, and it's not that dissimilar. Similarly, Sieg and Pfefferman have introduced essentially S2K. S2K decides the truth of pi 1K formulas. Here, this E can decide the truth of arithmetical formulas. And you write pi 1K formulas in their Kleenie normal form. And S2K takes the appropriate function as input and decides whether the associated pi 1K formula is true or not. Again, this goes back to Sieg and Pfefferman in this proof theory book, 40-year saga something, I believe. And yeah, so it's not that crazy. In reverse math, you look at systems like ACA 0, pi 1K comprehension. And in higher order reverse math, you just you take these functionals, E2, S2K, and that's how you measure the strength. You directly have discontinuous functions available instead of comprehension. And that reduces coding, which is nice. And I should say this is conventional comprehension. So if you say pi 1K formula, one means only first and second order parameters are allowed. So numbers and sets of number parameters. This is called conventional comprehension. Feynman has looked at unconventional comprehension, so allowing third order parameters. In an unpublished manuscript, well, in an appendix of an unpublished manuscript. And Kollenbach has studied this too in Feynman Festschrift, exactly. So, but those are the only two papers I know of. So conventional comprehension is, yeah, conventional, mainstream, and so on. Now, I mentioned coding. Let's look at yay coding. So let's look at good news for code. Yeah, there we have the epsilon delta definition of continuity. For all epsilon, for all x, there is a delta. So this means that f is continuous. Everybody knows this definition, and outside of logic, nobody has ever heard of this, I guess. Continuity via codes. So this is a code for a continuous partial function. The two are equivalent, and this was known to Kleene already. Yeah, actually they're equivalent in a weak higher order system based on weak Koenig's lemma. So Kleene knew that they were equivalent. Kollenbach, using a construction by Neumann, showed that they're equivalent for the, say, the unit interval or Cantor space. And yeah, you just need higher types, of course, and weak Koenig's lemma. So then you can say, well, this is a third order object that is continuous, and there is such a phi that represents it. And for that, you need weak Koenig lemma. It's a little bit involved, but it does work. So the two are the same. And yeah, this, of course, made people happy, I guess, because it shows you that if you're doing the reverse math of analysis, if you have a theorem about continuous functions, whether or not you use coding doesn't matter, assuming WKL, but WKL is is weak by name, as its name suggests. So this is all good, this is all great. And this, as I said, this gives rise to an optimistic view. Let's summarize that once more. So the Gödel hierarchy is a classification based on logical strength with weak, medium, and strong ranges. Reverse math tells us that it's mostly empty. Ordinary math occupies the lower parts up to pi11 or pi12 comprehension. And Kollenbach has introduced higher order reverse math. It uses a richer language to reduce the use of coding representations, which can get messy if we are being honest. And Friedman, Simpson, and Montalban have written papers on open questions in reverse math, and both of them seem rather optimistic. Coding is unproblematic. It has no great influence on the reverse math classification of ordinary mathematics. That is the received view. And as often is the case, the received view is somewhat flawed, well, actually fundamentally flawed. So here follows a list of theorems for ordinary math, from ordinary mathematics. So, for example, before there was the Lebesgue integral, there was the Riemann integral, which had its own convergence theorems, shown by, for example, Arzela. It's much more primitive than the Lebesgue integral, but it does have its convergence theorems. So that's ordinary math, I would say. The Jordan decomposition theorem is Nice et al. Andre Nice, they were saying in their paper about the Jordan decomposition theorem, like, this is ordinary math, look at it. Sure. And there's many theorems. The Heine-Borel theorem for uncountable covers, also called Cousin's lemma, goes back a while, ordinary math. Most people would agree that there's a function that is not bare class 2. It's rather, expand your world a little, So if a function is discontinuous at each point, it's not Riemann integrable. This was shown by Henkel in 1870. And there's many. If a function is Riemann integrable and positive and has 0, then it must be 0 somewhere. This is basic stuff, right? You could ask students to prove this, but it's too easy almost. Before the Lebesgue measure, there was the Peano-Jordan measure and the fundamental theorem of calculus, because why not? If you have a function of bounded variation, you can, integration and differentiation cancel each other out. That's the fundamental theorem of calculus, known to Newton, perhaps also Leibniz. And this happens in at least one point. All these theorems are ordinary math, and some of them are so basic, students would laugh at you, right? Especially there's one point, And there's many more examples. And what's so special about these many examples? Now, what's their place in the Gödel hierarchy? So again, the no man's land, the big five. If we formulate them in Coulombach's higher order reverse math, so essentially they're all part of the language of third order arithmetic. So a function that is Riemann integrable, you can write that down in third order arithmetic. But if we code them, they're down here. Maybe some pop up to ACA 0, but some of them here are at the level of Z2. Others are, with third order functions. With codes representations, they're down here. So some might say that's a big difference. And it's actually all theorems from this list and many more are in this empty no man's land and very different from the known second order reverse math classification. Right, now that's two big problems. So coding does change logical strength apparently, massively. And they shouldn't be in this no man's land. So Dag and I have metric oodles of example, which means many, many, many. And the most basic case you ask, because you would, so there's many examples. Now, what's the most basic case? And now we're coming to the uncountability of the reals. What is often called Cantor's theorem usually means that there's no surjection from N to R. But Dag and I stumbled across NIN. There is no injection from R to N. And Cantor's theorem is weak. It's provable in computable or constructive math, like Bishop includes it in his book, I guess. And there's an efficient algorithm for it even. So if you have a sequence of reals, you can efficiently compute a real not in that sequence. That's Cantor's theorem. There's no surjection from N to R. However, NIN, that there is no injection from R to N, is classified at the top of the no man's land that I mentioned before. And actually, all these aforementioned theorems about Riemann integration, bounded variation, they all imply NIN. So Dag and I proved that NIN is classified where it is, and then the rest just follows, So NIN is in a sense the weakest third order principle that is hard to prove. Now, to be absolutely clear, what do I mean by classified at the level of Z2? So now some reverse history. So second order arithmetic actually came last. It was somehow derived from the Grundlage. And so second order arithmetic has a third order conservative extension, Z2 little omega, and a fourth order conservative extension, Z2 big omega. In fact, this thing can be found in the Grundlage. Sieg and Feynman derived this, and presumably Kreisel then chopped off the third order stuff, and then we got this. So they all prove the same second order sentences. This was proved by James Hunter in his PhD thesis under Stefan Lemp. It's a good thesis. You may want to read it. And so Z2 little omega is just essentially all the pi1k comprehensions together. So you have these functionals, third order functionals, which decide pi1k formulas. Going back to Sieg-Feynman, so Coulombach's base theory plus functionals that decide pi1k formulas. These are third order, and all together yield a conservative extension of Z2 for the L2 language, of course, for language of second order arithmetic. And then, clean is E3, gives you Z2 big omega. So this one can decide any of this kind of quantifier. So if you have a quantifier over bare space, which makes some third order object 0, E knows about it. But E is fourth order, it's type 3. So 3 is the type, because all this is, of course, officially a type theory. But so the point is that these are all prove the same second order sentences. And this can be found in Hilbert Bernays. Sieg and Feverman, they studied this more special case of where it's restricted to pi1k formulas, and then there's C2. So yeah, NIN, there's no injection from the unit interval to N. In BI, there's no bijection from unit interval to N. And Z2 big omega can prove these two guys. So these are statements of third order arithmetic. And we need fourth order Kleene E3 to prove it. Z2 little omega cannot prove either. Z2 little omega has these third order comprehension functionals. And yeah, there's no injection, just quantifies overall third order functionals. And so in particular, Z2 little omega plus there is a bijection between the unit interval and N is consistent. And so the entire development of reverse math, second order arithmetic, etc., is consistent with the reals are countable. So the reals are a potential infinity, at least according to John Stilwell, who wrote A Mathematician's in the Street Introduction to Reverse Math. So yeah, I mean, you may decide for yourself what that means for you. To me, this means the intellectual bankruptcy of coding. But you knew that already, of course. Right, now, how do we make such a model? So we want to make a model. This is a little bit of an intermezzo. And it's not, I mean, the technical details are complicated. And please ask Dag Nolman. But the concept is not that difficult. So first of all, we don't use forcing. So how do we make a model in which Cantor space 2 to the n is countable? Well, first of all, it has to be a model of second order arithmetic and even Z2 little omega. So we just take all these functionals. So remember, S2k decides pi1k formulas. We just take all of those and close under Kleene's S1 to S9 schemes. So yeah, computation in objects of all finite types. So we have all objects of finite types that are computable in some S2k. Now let's look at Cantor space. So each f in this model M is computable in some S2k. And yeah, computable means there is some number which says that, well, we can compute f in terms of S2k via the mth algorithm. Again, the details are somewhat technical, but I mean, the idea is simple, right? We can compute f from some S2k, and m is an index of the mth algorithm, just like with Turing machines. Now, if we were to have the axiom of choice, we could define some f that for each f computable in some S2k outputs this m. So yeah, because it exists, so the axiom of choice said, well, there's a choice function. And now comes the secret sauce. So for every little f, there is some m where the mth algorithm computes f from S2k. And so Gandhi's selection, Robin Gandhi's masterpiece in many ways, tells us that there is a choice function that is S1 to S9 computable relative to some S2k, and therefore already in the model M. So we know that this choice function exists, but some choice function or other already exists in the model by Gandhi's selection. And then, of course, this such an f is, of course, an injection because it maps 2 to the n uniquely to n from the point of view of the model M. So it's Gandhi's selection, which says that S1 to S9 computability, even with parameters, satisfies some version of the axiom of choice. That is the secret sauce. The technical details are technical, but this is the idea. This is how we build such a model. And this is, this is how you build such a model. And Gandhi selection only applies to third order objects. For higher types, there's other selection principles, but they're not as suitable for our purposes, let's say. So here you have it. Please read our paper on the uncountability of R if you are interested in details, all right, yeah, that's the sketch. And of course, then I present this somewhere, Dag presents this somewhere. And yeah, so these are the results. There's fourth order extension of conservative extension of second order arithmetic. It proves that there's no injection and no bijection. Z2 little omega cannot prove either. Of course, you prove this, and then come the skeptics. Yeah, you know, NIN. Yeah, I mean, you know, sure, but you quantify over arbitrary third order objects. And that's somehow bad in our pseudo nominalist world. So you get negative results like Z2 little omega cannot prove NIN or NBI, but you use arbitrary third order objects. That's bad. Yeah, until it's not. Also, countable combinatorics, RT22. You know, RT22 is impervious to this. So yeah, fancy words, impervious. I mean, the skeptics like to use fancy words. Unfortunately, the skeptics is wrong. So for example, you don't have to, NIN is actually equivalent to the statement, there is no injection of bounded variation from the unit interval to Q. You can also restrict to Borel sets or Baire class 1, Borel functions, Baire class 1 functions, upper or lower semi-continuous functions. So you don't have to quantify over arbitrary third order objects, only over functions from reals to reals that have bounded variation. But those functions of bounded variation only have countably many points of discontinuity in ZF or ZFC. But so the point is, these are very nice objects. Continuous functions, even the constructivists have no problems with. And bounded variation is just a slight step outside of the continuous world because, well, it only has a function of bounded variation, only has countably many discontinuities. And NIN is actually equivalent to NIN restricted to functions of bounded variation. And so, yeah, the skeptic is wrong, has nothing to do with arbitrary third order objects. Moreover, since you ask, how hard is it to say that a function of bounded variation has a reverse math code? This has been studied by Nice, Yokoyama, Kreutzer, etc., et al. And yeah, NIN follows from any statement of this nature, like a function of bounded variation has a reverse math code, which is hard to prove. And this one is a nice one. Oopsie daisy. So Koenig's lemma, RT22 ADS. You can formulate for sets of reals that are countable. So in particular, Koenig's lemma, but Frank Ramsey talked about sets. He wasn't talking about sequences of naturals. You can say, well, here we have a set of reals that is countable. There's an injection or a bijection to N. Now color it in some way or other. And this is NIN implies this. So if you sort of drop the sequence language from second order arithmetic and just talk about sets of reals that are countable, as Koenig did, as Frank Ramsey did, and ADS has this equivalent formulation, rival sands, exactly, by rival sands, some rival sands theorem. They also talked about sets and arbitrary size, and there you go. And again, note that functions of bounded variation only have countably many points of discontinuity. So this is like you barely step outside of the continuous and boom, coding blows up in your face. And yeah, I mean, what more can I say? I mean, again, a picture is more than 1,000 words, says more than 1,000 words. A wise Belgian once said, no, I mean, I could be talking about myself, but no. This is not a pipe, René Magritte. There's a difference between objects and their representations and codes. That is what Magritte tried to say. And if you find that surreal, well, tough luck. And yeah, what I have mentioned, and this is what you should remember, if you talk about continuous functions and you assume weak-Koenig lemma, it's all the same codes and their the actual objects. This was known to Kleene and pushed down to the level of weak-Koenig lemma by Kohlenbach and Norman. But step outside of the continuous a little bit, and there's a huge difference between objects and their representations or codes, as we have just seen. This was shown by Dag Norman and myself, and this is also true for Borel, semi-continuity, Baire class 1, and presumably a lot of other notions. So this is what I want you to remember from the first part. Coding fails spectacularly if you step outside of the continuous a little bit. That is my point. And yeah, please also remember this pretty picture. Surreal as it may be. All right, that's just the first part. Now, so you can reject this and hate it and yeah, but yeah, that doesn't make it go away. You could also embrace it like Dag and I have done. And then you may find a big 6 and a big 7 system of reverse mathematics. So the big 5 of reverse math I mentioned, they are, well, the base theory, RCA0. And then there's these 4 systems that involve many equivalences. Even if you don't believe in any of this stuff or in reverse math, you must admit there are a lot of equivalences. And like Ramsey's theorem for pairs doesn't have that many equivalences. And we're interested in the 2 weakest ones, ACA0 and WKL0. So they have a higher order counterpart. So here's Kohlenbach's base theory. And so yeah, WKL is essentially countable Heine-Borel compactness. ACA0 allows you to do sequential compactness and a million other equivalences, of course. Now, what are these strange things? Well, I said a higher order counterpart, so what could that be? So HBT, Heine-Borel theorem, is uncountable Heine-Borel. So Heine-Borel for uncountable covers, 1895 Pierre Coussin, by the way. And yeah, here we have sequential compactness. What's the generalization of sequences? Nets, of course. And yeah, there's a notion of net compactness due to E.H. Moore circa 1900. He was the first president of the AMS and the head of department of Chicago, founding head maybe even of Chicago Chicago Math. And this entire business with nets and related math, I mean, like Anil Narod told me he had a course on that, still from Moore's successor. I'm blanking on the name for a second. Yeah. So anyway, countable Heine-Borel, sequential compactness, and yeah, we higher order counterparts obviously are uncountable Heine-Borel and nets. Nets are just a generalization of sequences to arbitrary index sets. And actually uncountable Heine-Borel by itself proves the same L2 sentences as WKL0. So by itself, it's not so strong. It's hard to prove, but not more L2 consequences. Booth, same story. And now so it gets a little technical. There is this thing called the ECF translation. It converts Booth and HBT to these systems. And the same for equivalences. What is ECF? It was pioneered by Troelstra. It's a syntactic translation, and it translates all third and higher order objects by reverse math codes by Kleene associates. So it's an interpretation in Kleene's second model, as they call it. So, and I mean, before, this is not something crazy. This is the ECF is the canonical model of type theory in a sense, right? Everything is interpreted as RM codes. And so if you take uncountable compactness or net compactness and run it through ECF, you get the usual or up to logical details ACA0 and WKL0. So I'm calling this the higher order counterpart for a number of reasons. So yeah, so yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? You can look at countable compactness, you can look at sequential compactness, then you have these uncountable generalizations. And if you apply the ECF translation, so the interpretation to the canonical model of type theory due to Kleene, and yeah, Troelstra worked out the details, then 2 becomes 1. And that's how you prove all these conservation results, of course, right? But yeah, so there you have it. Now, so for conceptual reasons, there must be something here between uncountable compactness and RCA0 little omega. And why? Why is there something between? We know that there's not, I mean, here there's a lot of stuff, but no big system, you know? Now, RCA0 omega is a weak system, it's the base theory, and it's consistent with Brouwer's theorem, which says that all functions on the reals are continuous, let's say. All right? Now, if all functions on the reals are continuous, then you can show that countable sets of reals formulated with injections and bijections to n are at most finite. Yeah, then of course, yeah, any theorem about countable sets is trivial. So that's the idea. If all functions on the reals are continuous, and theorems about countable sets, like we can enumerate a countable set, they're trivially true. Yeah, of course, because of course we can enumerate a finite set. And or a countable set in the unit interval has a supremum. Yeah, that's trivial because if they're finite. So if all functions on the reals are continuous, theorems are trivial. And so theorems about countable sets therefore have the same first order strength as RCA0 little omega. So Colombij's base theory is weak. There is a model in which all functions are continuous. Hint ECF, the canonical model of type theory. And in this model, all countable sets are trivial, they're finite. And so, yeah, we can easily find suprema. And that's why there must be something here at the level, because they must have the same first order strength. And lo and behold, that here, of course, in second order reverse math, there's no known big system, no node system with lots of equivalences. But Dak and I found these two pretty boys and girls, and they have lots of equivalences. So cocode 0 expresses that a countable set of reals can be enumerated. A very basic operation. And the countable here means an injection to n, which is in Kuhnen's book on set theory, and Brouwer mentioned this notion too. Cocode 1 is if there's an injection, if there's a bijection to n, as can be found in Erbacek-Jech, strongly countable, Dak and I call it, then we can enumerate these sets. And yeah, those are big systems, so there's many equivalences. I will soon clobber you to death with many equivalences. First, why would we study those? Well, first of all, history. Borel explicitly states cocode 1 in his PhD thesis. He actually formulates the Heine-Borel theorem. So Borel's Heine-Borel theorem is formulated for strongly countable sets of interval covers. So yeah, history. I mean, you know. Another reason, sociology. If you look at a textbook, cocode I is used all the time. Usually when you prove a set to be countable, you only provide an injection or bijection. But when a countable set is given, you just assume that you can enumerate it. And this is how Borel explains it. So a set is, as there's a bijection to n, we call such a set enumerable because we can enumerate the elements one after the other. So yeah, it's implicit in most of textbook literature. And there's also the coolness. Cocode 0 is explosive if you add it to higher order pi11 comprehension. So the Suslin functional. If you then can enumerate countable sets, then you get pi12 comprehension. So yeah, this is where the reverse math of topology lives. And yeah, in the context of ordinal analysis, Michael Rachin and Per-Martin Löw have said, well, pi1-2 comprehension dwarfs pi1-1 comprehension, or there's a chasm and abyss. But so the only thing you need to bridge this chasm or abyss, or have this dwarf grow into a giant, is that you can enumerate countable sets. Countable meaning injection to n. So yeah, that's rather cool. And also the same holds for all the equivalences of cocode 0. Also, what's nice, this system lives at the level of hyper-arithmetical analysis. There's a very technical definition of what hyper-arithmetical analysis means. And the associated second-order systems are rather logical, to say the least. But this system, if we can enumerate strongly countable sets, then a higher order ACA0 omega lives somewhere in between there. So, I mean, this is more of a thing for logicians, I guess. So, some definitions. So, sets are given by possibly discontinuous characteristic functions. Why? In second-order reverse math, open and closed sets have continuous characteristic functions. And so, yeah, we just use possibly discontinuous ones. And most of what I'm going to say goes through for any notion of set. You can prove this, actually. So there's nothing particular about characteristic functions. They're just very convenient. And also, yeah, from the mainstream of measure theory, Dirichlet, and even Euler. Euler used discontinuous functions, and Dirichlet, of course, has the characteristics function of Q. So, and then a set is countable if there is a Y which is injective on A. Strongly countable means injective and surjective. And cocode 0 then says a countable set can be enumerated. So this is a perfectly well and good statement of the language of finite types, because set means characteristic function. Then, of course, Bolzano-Weierstrass. We can say a countable set has a supremum. And then we have lots of equivalences, this kind of stuff. So if we have a little bit of induction, sometimes we need it, point-wise ordering rather than the lexicographic ordering. Supremum of this kind exists, these kind of things. Or the monotone convergence theorem for nets with countable index sets. And this boot that I mentioned, we can restrict it with at most one conditions. So there's already some robustness there. So the Bolzano-Weierstrass for countable sets is equivalent to cocode 0. Nice. And we can sort of fragments of Cantor Bernstein, for example, a non-enumerable set that is closed has a limit point. A non-enumerable set contains a limit point. And a collection of disjoint open intervals is enumerable. So these three are neat because cocode talks about injections, but the other three do not. They talk about enumerable and non-enumerable sets. And D is often called CCC, the countable chain condition, first formulated by Cantor. And so, equivalences, more equivalences. And some more, like cocode 1 plus a collection of disjoint open intervals in R is strongly countable. So E is formulated with bijections only. So injections or not, bijections or enumerable stuff, it doesn't matter. All this stuff is equivalent. And there's a version of the Cantor Bernstein theorem, Bernstein, equivalent to cocode 0, and so on and so forth, like this is the Heine-Borel theorem by Borel, a countable set that of intervals that covers the unit interval. There's a finite subcover. And we don't know exactly whether it's equivalent, but the sequential version is equivalent to cocode 0. So sequential version says that if you have a sequence of sets, then there's a sequence of finite subcovers. And so sequential versions are well studied in reverse math. So yeah, cocode 0 is equivalent to the sequential version of this. If there's a sequence of ANs such that in case AN covers the unit interval, then there's a sequence of finite subcovers. So yeah, that. I mean, this is how Heine-Borel. Well, Borel used it bijections. This is using injections, of course. And you can write down sequential versions of ADS, RT22, Koenig's lemma, and they all behave in the same way. So yeah, if there's a sequence of some countable objects, then there's a sequence of colorings and so on. So even countable combinatorics is not impervious to these observations. Like whether or not you formulate combinatorics with sequences or sets of reals that are countable apparently makes a big difference. And we shall even look at some set theory. The countable union theorem expresses that a countable union of countable sets is countable. Right? This is not provable in ZF, and we take the following version. Let AN be a sequence of sets, and suppose there's an enumeration, for each n there is an enumeration of AN. Then there's an enumeration of the union. And actually, of course, this is not provable. I mean, there's natural versions of the countable union theorem equivalent to cocode I. So yeah, we can drag in set theory, why not? And of course, these restrictions are provable in ZF, obviously. But still, I mean, the idea of taking a bunch of enumerations and then making them into one master enumeration, that's the same as cocode I. Also, the reals are not a union of countable sets. You can get similar results there. And this is at the same level where we get results like there is a function that is not Baire2, or there is a set that is not Borel, Now, countable linear orders. I've sat through too many of talks about countable linear orders. They're of course studied via sequences because that's all there is in second order reverse math. But if you say, well, a countable linear ordering, so we have a set of reals, it's countable, so there's an injection to n. And this is order isomorphic to a subset of Q. That's equivalent to cocode 0. And some other things. A countable and dense linear ordering without endpoints is order isomorphic to Q. Yeah, and also even for countable well orderings, we can compare them. The former is order isomorphic to the latter, or an initial segment or the latter, or vice versa. So again, countable means a subset of the reals that happens to be countable. There's an injection to n. And ironically, these all go back to Cantor one way or the other. And if you have seen second order reverse math talks, they often talk about the order type eta of the rationals, as if this were to make sense. But it doesn't. This is equivalent to cocode 0. And this implies, of course, cocode 0 implies that the unit interval is uncountable. It implies NIN. It's hard to prove. It's at the level of Z2, big omega. That's where you can prove it. So it's perfectly consistent with second order arithmetic that there are countable linear orderings that are not order isomorphic to a subset of Q. So the order type eta of the rationals, it doesn't make any sense if you only have Z2 or Z2 little omega. If you want it to make sense in the usual way, you need Z2 big omega. So yeah, that. CWO, it's not from the reverse math of ATR0. We can compare countable well orders. Well, if they're given by a sequence, if you want well orders that happen to be countable, and then you can't, unless, well, C2 big omega. So again, countable whatever is not impervious to the problems that I have mentioned. So yeah. Yeah, I should be wrapping up soon. So most, not all, goes through if you restrict to strongly countable sets. Cocode 1 has many equivalences. There's some weird systems, doesn't matter. And this is where this system, cocode 1, you can enumerate a strongly countable set. This is where this lives at the level of hyperarithmetical analysis, but this is technical. You should look at it yourself. So first, you shall remember this picture by Magritte. Ceci n'est pas une pipe. This is not a pipe. And then this is the second picture you shall remember. There's no known big system here. Here are two systems for which there are many equivalences. And this is a very basic idea. Countable sets can be enumerated. Strongly countable sets can be enumerated. Lots of equivalences, some prettier than others, all very conceptual. Of course, this is just scratching the surface. Please come and help us, because we're only two, Dag Norman and I. Of course, cocode 0 implies that there's no, and cocode 1 also implies that there's no bijection from the unit interval to n. So these are hard to prove. Z2 big omega is needed, obviously. Now, something totally different, but actually quite the same in my last 5 minutes. There is such a thing as the real world. Physicists try to describe it via their theories. And the most tested one, perhaps, is quantum mechanics, or the submicroscopic. It has a wave mechanic formulation. And here are some 3 central principles: the Feynman Kac formula, the Born rule, and the uncertainty principle, that imply NIN, that there's no injection from the unit interval to n. And let's discuss this in a little bit more detail. So this is the Feynman Kac formula. It says that a free particle has a wave function at time t as follows. So you integrate over all of space. This is the wave function at time t equals 0. And this is the propagator, a known function. So a free particle behaves like this. And sure, why not? This is what the physicists say. But if there is an injection from the unit interval to n, you can put some f and g there. And I mean, there's many of them, and they're everywhere positive functions of bounded variation. So to be absolutely clear, this is not some sort of trick from Lebesgue measure theory. These are functions of bounded variation. They have in ZF only countably many discontinuities. So that's very close to continuous. That's very close to the real world. And so either you say, well, this can't happen. And of course, the reals are uncountable. You accept nin, then this can't happen. But it's hard to prove, as I said. Or we reject 5 by just saying, look, these f and g, it's nonsense. They're non-physical. Go away. But then you're throwing out functions of bounded variation. You're essentially saying, the universe is continuous or close to that. So there you have it. And for the Born rule is similar. The probability that a free particle is in volume V, where psi is the wave function, is given as this. And you could add f and g of bounded variation in space and time coordinates. They're everywhere positive. And that's a problem, right? Because the Born rule says this has to happen. But in case there's an injection from the reals to n, you can have this. And so again, we should either accept that the reals are uncountable, which is a mathematical and hard to prove statement, or we reject number 6, saying, the universe is continuous anyway, it's bounded variation, so throw that out. And the uncertainty principle by Heisenberg, Kennard from Cornell, Kennard and Weil, is this: the uncertainties of measuring position and momentum are like so. And in the wave mechanics formulation, these are integrals involving the wave function. And there are everywhere positive functions of bounded variation that do not satisfy the uncertainty principle in case there's an injection from R to N. So either we accept that the reals are uncountable, or we somehow say these exceptional functions are non-physical, but again, that seems to imply that the universe is rather continuous. All right, so thanks for bearing with me. And of course, thanks. Oh, there should be a RUB Bochum here too. So please imagine an RUB Bochum there. Thank you for your attention.